For 20 years, he'd been quietly walking the museum corridors, never talking about his past, never mentioning where he'd learned to spot a forgery from across the room, until artificial intelligence found his art trafficking and cultural heritage protection background. Welcome to AI Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of hidden expertise, cultural justice, and how technology uncovered a guardian of the art world hiding behind a security badge, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe cultural heritage belongs to all humanity, hit that subscribe button. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York never sleeps. Even after the last visitor leaves, the building hums with activity, conservators working late, researchers accessing archives, security guards making their rounds through galleries filled with humanity's greatest treasures. Among those guards, one figure had become part of the museum's landscape. Vinny Castellano, 61 years old, had been walking these halls for 20 years. Always punctual, always professional, always observant in ways that went beyond typical security training. Vinny worked the night shift in the European paintings wing, where Rembrandts and Van Goghs hung under carefully controlled lighting. His routine was methodical: check environmental controls, monitor alarm systems, ensure nothing had shifted or changed since the day shift ended. What made Vinny different from other guards wasn't just his dedication, it was his relationship with the art itself. During quiet moments between rounds, Vinny would pause in front of particular paintings, not as a casual observer, but with the focused attention of someone who understood what he was seeing. He'd notice details that most visitors missed: brushstroke techniques, color compositions, the subtle signs of aging that revealed an artwork's authenticity. Vinny knows these paintings better than some of our curators, other guards would joke. Guy could give tours if he wanted to, but Vinny never wanted to. He seemed content to remain invisible, protecting the art without drawing attention to himself or his unusual depth of knowledge. The few times colleagues asked about his background, Vinny would give vague answers: worked in art before this, different kind of work. Nothing more specific, nothing that explained why he could identify the provenance of obscure 16th-century pieces or spot restoration work that wasn't mentioned in official documentation. Dr. Sarah Chen was the museum's new director of acquisitions, responsible for evaluating potential purchases and donations. During her first few months, she'd noticed something unusual about the night security guard in European paintings. Vinny would sometimes linger near pieces that were being considered for acquisition, pieces that weren't yet on public display. His body language suggested he was evaluating them, not just guarding them. "Vinny, what do you think of the new Monet acquisition?" Sarah asked one evening, testing her hypothesis. "Beautiful piece," Vinny said carefully, "though the brushwork in the water lilies section is interesting." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Interesting how?" Vinny hesitated. "Just different from his typical technique from that period. Could be intentional experimentation, could be," he trailed off. "Could be what?" "Nothing, just observations." But Sarah pressed. "Vinny, that's a very sophisticated analysis. Where did you learn to evaluate impressionist techniques? You pick things up working around art for 20 years. Sarah wasn't convinced. Vinny's comments suggested knowledge that went way beyond casual exposure. His understanding of artistic techniques, market values, and authentication markers was almost professional level. The breakthrough came when the museum was approached about a potential donation of a newly discovered Picasso sketch. The piece came with impressive documentation, but something about it bothered Sarah. "What do you think?" she asked Vinny during one of his rounds, showing him a photograph of the sketch. Vinny studied the image for a long moment. "The paper's wrong," he said finally. "Wrong how?" "Picasso used specific paper types during different periods. This paper wasn't manufactured until after his death. Also, the charcoal technique doesn't match his hand movement patterns." Sarah stared at him. "Vinny, how do you know about Picasso's charcoal techniques and paper preferences?" Vinny realized he'd said too much. "Like I said, you pick things up." But Sarah knew that level of expertise couldn't be picked up casually. It had to be learned professionally. The Met had recently implemented an AI system designed to analyze visitor behavior and optimize gallery layouts. The program used facial recognition and movement tracking to understand how people interacted with different artworks. Dr. Chen had access to the system for her research on viewer engagement. Curious about Vinny's unusual expertise, she decided to analyze his movement patterns during his security rounds. What the AI found was extraordinary. Vinny's interaction patterns with artworks were unlike any other guard in the system. He spent significantly more time examining pieces that were later identified as problematic, forgeries, stolen works, or pieces with questionable provenance. The AI had identified something else. Vinny's movement patterns and observation techniques matched profiles associated with professional art authentication and investigation work. But here's what really caught the system's attention. Facial recognition analysis suggested Vinny had been photographed at numerous art crime scenes and authentication hearings over the past 30 years, always in professional contexts. The AI flagged Vinny's profile as consistent with someone who had extensive training in art crime investigation, cultural heritage protection, and forensic authentication. Sarah ran the analysis multiple times. Each iteration suggested the same conclusion. The quiet museum guard was a former art crime specialist with decades of professional experience. Sarah approached Vinny carefully. Art crime investigation was a specialized field involving law enforcement, international agencies, and high-stakes cultural politics. If Vinny was former FBI art crime team or something similar, there might be sensitive reasons for his anonymity. "Vinny, I need to show you something," she said, approaching him during a quiet moment in the Renaissance Gallery. She showed him the AI analysis on her tablet. The behavioral patterns, the authentication expertise indicators, the facial recognition matches from art crime scenes. Vinny looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. "How accurate is this system?" he asked finally. "Very accurate. It's designed to identify expertise and unusual behavioral patterns." Vinny nodded slowly. "And what does it say I am?" "Someone with professional training in art crime investigation, someone who's been at major art recovery operations, someone who knows way more about authentication and provenance than any security guard should." Vinny was quiet for several minutes, standing in front of a Caravaggio that he'd protected for 20 years. Vincent Castellano, FBI art crime team, 32 years, specialized in stolen masterpieces, forgery networks, and cultural heritage crimes, retired in 2004. Sarah felt her breath catch. The FBI art crime team was legendary, the elite unit that recovered stolen masterpieces and dismantled international art trafficking networks. "Why did you become a security guard?" "Because I wasn't ready to leave the art behind," Vinny said quietly. "This was the only way I could stay connected to the work without the politics and bureaucracy." Vinny's story emerged over several conversations. He'd spent 3 decades as one of the FBI's most successful art crime investigators, working cases that ranged from Nazi-looted art to contemporary forgery rings. "I loved the work," Vinny explained. "Every case was a puzzle, historical research, forensic analysis, international cooperation. And when you recovered a stolen masterpiece, you were literally returning stolen culture to humanity." But the work had taken a toll. Vinny had seen too many important artworks destroyed by criminals who viewed them as commodities rather than cultural treasures. Too many cases where political considerations trumped cultural justice. The breaking point came with a case involving looted Iraqi artifacts, Vinny continued. "We had evidence showing exactly who was trafficking ancient Mesopotamian pieces, but we couldn't prosecute because it would embarrass powerful collectors and institutions." Vinny had requested early retirement rather than continue working in a system that sometimes protected art criminals instead of prosecuting them. "So I came here. Same art, same mission, protecting cultural heritage, just different methods." Sarah understood. "You've been doing unofficial authentication work during your security rounds." "Not officially," Vinny said carefully, "but if I happen to notice something suspicious about a piece's authenticity or provenance, and if I happen to mention it to the right person." Sarah realized what he was saying. "How many forgeries have you identified over the past 20 years?" 17, all quietly removed from exhibition or sale without publicity. No lawsuits, no scandals, just corrections. "And stolen works, 6 pieces returned to their rightful owners or countries of origin. Again quietly handled through proper channels." Vinny had been conducting undercover art crime investigation for 20 years, using his security position to protect the museum from acquiring problematic pieces. Word of Vinny's background spread carefully through the museum's senior staff. Not as gossip, but as recognition of someone whose expertise had been serving the institution in ways they'd never realized. Pieces that had been quietly removed from consideration suddenly made sense. Authentication concerns that had seemed overly cautious were revealed as expert professional judgment. "Vinny's been protecting our reputation for 2 decades, the museum director noted. "His expertise prevented us from acquiring works that would have been embarrassing or legally problematic later." The revelation changed how the museum approached acquisitions. Knowing they had access to former FBI art crime expertise made the authentication process more rigorous and reliable. But Vinny remained focused on his core mission, protecting the art and ensuring that visitors experienced authentic cultural treasures. "Authentication isn't about being picky," Vinny explained to the curatorial staff.
It's about integrity. When someone stands in front of a painting, they deserve to be seeing what the label says they're seeing. The museum offered Vinny opportunities to consult officially, lecture on art crime, and develop authentication protocols. He accepted some consulting work but declined public-facing roles. "I'm not interested in being the face of art crime investigation," Vinny said. "I'm interested in making sure the art is real and the heritage is protected." Vinny's approach to museum security evolved after his background became known. He developed informal protocols for evaluating suspicious donations, identifying potential forgeries, and maintaining provenance documentation. The expertise he brought wasn't just about authentication, it was about understanding the international art market, recognizing trafficking patterns, and identifying pieces that might have problematic ownership histories. Art crime is international and sophisticated, Vinny explained to the museum's security team. Criminals use museums and galleries to legitimize stolen or forged pieces. Our job is to make sure we're not unwilling participants in cultural theft. Vinny's methods helped the Met avoid several potential scandals involving Nazi-looted art, stolen archaeological artifacts, and sophisticated forgeries that had fooled other institutions. His work represented something unique, law enforcement expertise being used proactively to prevent cultural crimes rather than reactively to solve them. "Prevention is better than recovery," Vinny noted. "Once a fake piece enters the art world, it can cause damage for decades. Better to catch problems before they become problems." Today, Vinny Castellano still works night security at the Metropolitan Museum, but his influence extends far beyond those walls. The authentication techniques he developed are used by museums worldwide to evaluate acquisitions and identify problematic pieces. The AI system that discovered his background has been refined and implemented by cultural institutions globally. His case showed that expertise can be found in unexpected places, serving important missions in quiet ways. Vinny's story changed how we think about institutional knowledge, noted a museum studies professor. "Sometimes the most valuable expertise is the kind that works behind the scenes, preventing problems rather than solving them." Vinny has written a manual, Silent Guardian, Protecting Cultural Heritage from the Inside. It's used by museum security programs and cultural law enforcement agencies worldwide, but the work that matters most to Vinny still happens during his nightly rounds, where he continues protecting humanity's artistic legacy one painting at a time. "Every authentic piece of art is a victory against cultural crime," Vinny reflects. "Every forgery we catch is culture preserved for future generations." The artificial intelligence that uncovered Vinny's secret had been designed to optimize museum operations, but it discovered something more important: how expertise developed in one context can continue serving the same mission in different circumstances. Vincent Castellano spent 32 years as an FBI art crime investigator recovering stolen culture. He spent 20 more years as a museum guard protecting it proactively. Both roles required the same skills: authentication knowledge, pattern recognition, and deep commitment to cultural preservation. But the second career allowed him to prevent crimes rather than just solve them. "The best art crime work is the kind that makes crime impossible," Vinny explains to law enforcement trainees. "When institutions have strong authentication processes and expertise, criminals can't use them to legitimize stolen goods." Vinny's approach represents an evolution in cultural protection, embedding expertise within cultural institutions rather than relying solely on external law enforcement. His influence continues through the dozens of authentication protocols, forgery identification techniques, and provenance verification methods that are now standard practice at major museums. But perhaps most importantly, Vinny proved that cultural protection doesn't always require badges and authority. Sometimes it just requires knowledge, dedication, and the understanding that every authentic artwork represents a victory over those who would exploit human culture for profit. The FBI art crime investigator who became a museum guard represents something important about dedication, expertise, and the protection of cultural heritage. Vinny's story shows us that artificial intelligence isn't just about efficiency or security. Sometimes it's about recognizing that expertise takes many forms, and that the most important cultural protection work often happens quietly, behind the scenes, in ways that prevent problems rather than solve them. And sometimes the greatest victories in cultural preservation aren't the dramatic recoveries that make headlines. They're the quiet moments when someone with knowledge looks at a potential acquisition and says no, preventing fake culture from displacing authentic heritage. Because protecting art isn't just about security systems and insurance policies, it's about ensuring that when people encounter culture, they're experiencing truth rather than deception, authenticity rather than exploitation. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever encountered someone whose knowledge seemed deeper than their job title suggested? Someone who was quietly protecting something important without seeking recognition? Share their stories in the comments below. Tell us about the guardians, protectors, and quiet experts who preserve the things we value most. And if this story moved you, subscribe to AI Human Stories. Because in a world where artificial intelligence can spot patterns of expertise, the most important discoveries aren't about technology, they're about recognizing that the best protectors are often the ones who work in silence, that expertise serves many masters, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that prevent wars rather than win them. Until next time, remember, culture belongs to everyone, and some people dedicate their lives to making sure it stays that way.